Hello there! In today's video, I'll tell you a little bit about how I created some music for the first level of my game. I'll create an interesting track, a toned down version of the track better suited for the repeat listens, and then the boss music. Let's get right into it. First off, let's take a look at the level, so that we can figure out what kind of mood we need our music to inspire. This is my first game, so to be honest, there's not much to it. It's just a cave infested with living garden gnomes. It's brown, it's dark, there's some water, boxes and mining equipment, but other than that, it's just an empty cave. And there's the keyword for our music. Empty. Most composers would just use droning for that kind of emotional response, but I'm too poor to create good orchestral drones and too inexperienced with synthesizers to create electronic ones. Also, I don't really like drones. I decided to go with a major key, which is supposed to sound happy for two reasons. One, the game is supposed to be partially comedic, and two, I'm more experienced with music that's either sad or dark, just like my life. I could use the practice in creating something a bit more uplifting. So that's our goal. Music that inspires the feeling of emptiness without making the listener feel sad. I decided to start with finding an instrument that would sound empty, and in a momentary stroke of genius, I decided to put a super long reverb on a harp, and here's what it sounds like. I really like the echoey feeling, and I also like the gentle sound of the harp. It reminds me of the calm music of Majula from Dark Souls 2, so I composed the intro to use only harp. To be more specific, it uses two harps, one with the reverb and a clean one, to make the intro theme sound a bit more defined. Then I wrote main part 1, which is essentially a slow build-up to the climax of the track. It starts off with a simple melody played on the clean harp, while the echoey harp plays rhythmic chords. Then the synth comes in to add some color and variation to the sound. Then I decided to spice things up a bit with a simple counterpoint. Basically, the harp goes on with a simple melody, but I also introduce the violin. It starts off very simple, simply mimicking the chord progression. But then it starts playing its own melody. And after a while, I use the timpani drums to create a quick build-up for main part 2 and our climax of the song. Now we have the violin playing a kinda emotional melody, while the harps move on to playing nice playful arpeggios of a different chord progression, and the synth keeps adding color by playing some barely noticeable sounds. This segment sounded a bit too empty, so I started adding random shit. First, I added an electronic bass. You can barely hear it during this part, but it does round up the song a bit. I also added drums and a simple string section background. adding those two things, the transition between main part 1 and part 2 was a bit too sudden, so I added the strings and drums to the earlier parts of the song to create that smooth build-up. By the way, those aren't really drums, they are shakers, and they use a delay effect, which means that when a sound plays, it plays again after a while, just a bit quieter. This adds to the echoey feel, and it makes it sound like I'm capable of composing complex percussion sections, even though I'm really not. Midway through the climax, I also added a second violin to get some nice sounding harmonies in there. At that point, we can move on to the outro. I decided to reuse the theme from the intro, though not because I'm lazy, but because this is game music, so it's meant to be looped, and this gives us a smooth transition between the fairly intense climax and almost silent intro. After adjusting the volume of almost all instruments, I was pretty happy with the results. Probably not my best work, but it's good enough. So I plugged it into my game and all was good, for about 30 minutes. At that point I realized that the track is too intense for repeat listening. It has too many distinct points, and because of that, it gets boring after multiple repeats. To remedy that issue, I created a second version of the track. It's more or less the same, except this time most melodies are replaced by just string instruments playing the chords and their inversions. In the climax, I replaced the violin with a cello and composed a simpler melody. This track doesn't really have a lead instrument in the mid and high range of the sound spectrum, so it doesn't capture attention quite as much as the first version. And that was exactly what the game needed, so I plugged in that bad boy too. It would be a shame to delete the first track, so instead I created a music system that plays a random track while favoring the toned down version. Just because it's toned down doesn't mean it'll never get boring, so mixing these versions will help diversify the listening experience. The sound system also has a few pins left in the output section, and that is where I'll plug in environmental ambience once I prepare it. It's a pretty decent music system, if I do say so myself. It doesn't get boring or annoying quickly, especially since the music will also be broken up by the sounds of the player's movement, ambience, and combat system too. And now, time for the boss music. For the boss encounter, we're ditching the empty keyword, as our priority turns to the music sounding exciting and foreboding. Sure, it's the first boss of the game, and most veteran gamers will be able to absolutely steamroll him, but I still want to give him a nice track. Let's talk a bit about the first 4 bars of the song, since there's actually quite a bit going on here. First of all, I use the echo harp again for the intro, but it's more as a callback to the main level theme rather than to inspire emptiness. In fact, I switched from a major scale to a minor one to make it sound darker. I also used some dark sounding intervals. At first I created 2 versions, one with minor sevenths and one with tritones. Tritones are famous for their dark sound, so dark in fact that they were forbidden at some point in history. But personally, I liked the sevenths better this time, since they also have a dissonant quality, but it evokes a feeling of anticipation, while the tritones go for a bit more uneasy feeling. So the sevenths sound a bit better for battle music, while the tritone theme would do alright in horror. Of course, that's just my opinion, you can let me know what you think down in the comments. And since this theme uses only the F minor 7th chord, I can basically put it anywhere in this track and it won't sound too out of place, as long as there aren't any key changes. Of course, the boss track isn't going to be the harp alone, so let's add some other instruments. This track will start while the player approaches the boss room, so I went for a slow build-up once again. First we got some cello accents, and then the tremolo in sul point articulation. And then I added all the staples of boss music: drums, low brass, and violin arpeggios, still playing the main theme. The next section has minimal background track and the brass instruments start playing some generic melodies and the strings arpeggios get more and more complex. I went for a foreboding and battle feel for this part and I think it turned out pretty okay. The last part is the return to the main theme, but this time it's a bit stronger. And after that, the song loops. And that's it. After composing the tracks, I just made 2 meta sound assets, put them in the level, and now there's music in my game. The level background music starts immediately once the level is opened. On the other hand, the boss meta sound asset is created when the player interacts with my bootleg fog wall, deleting the previous music asset at the same time. And that's all for today. See ya!